if you just look at the counterterrorism landscape, whether we're talking about some of the implications of the Hamas attack from October 7th to domestic terrorism, there are multiple vectors that we're concerned about when it comes to counterterrorism, and continue to be concerned about even actors within the United States inspired by ISIS. So that remains particularly challenging and dynamic. But as everyone has talked about for a few years, the range of threats we face from nation states has become just increasingly a focus of our work at the Justice Department, and that just reflects the same threat landscape that my colleagues across the government are working on, and that ranges from traditional espionage to sending our sensitive technologies to authoritarian countries like Russia and Iran, and to acts of transnational repression inside the United States carried out by China, and as well as lethal plotting by Iran targeting dissidents as well as former officials inside the United States. So if you just add all that together, and just the threat landscape, and again, I take it from the perspective right now, as you introduced me as the Justice Department person, our job is working with the FBI and the intelligence community to investigate and prosecute cases. But we sort of see that entire threat landscape. I sit with the Attorney General and the FBI Director every morning. We get the President's daily brief, and we talk about these threats. And it has been just an extraordinarily busy period. And some of that, frankly, I think we might talk about this, but some of that is related to the election and some of the actions we're seeing from adversaries, foreign adversaries around our election and trying to interfere with our election. So maybe I'll stop there and we can turn to more specific threats. But look, I just know folks are really busy in the government, and I think, and the people on this call reflect that as well.
Yeah, let's dig into a couple of these, and I do want to talk about elections in a little bit, but first, why don't we start kind of with a geopolitical look. You've made some announcement recently regarding China and regarding Russia. Top of mind for you right now in terms of the behaviors that you're seeing out there that are causing either cyber issues or other types of disruptive activities. You've made a couple of announcements in the press. There was a 32-page indictment filed, I think maybe just about 2 weeks ago now, where you're really focused in on disinformation and efforts for propaganda, things like that. Let's talk either China, Russia, wherever you want to start.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because I do think, and maybe just recency effect, but I'm coming out of a meeting just a moment ago talking about these cases. And so what we're really focused right now on is foreign election interference. And look, I think from one vantage point, the threats that we're facing from Iran, Russia, and China in particular, when it comes to our election, are as significant as ever. They are determined and persistent in their efforts to influence our elections, and that can mean a range of things, from sowing discord and trying to accelerate divisions within our society, to actually supporting one candidate or one party over the other. And so those efforts are really challenging, and they're kind of turbocharged by the use of artificial intelligence to increase the scale and reach and resonance of the messaging, as well as traditional sort of spear phishing attacks and the like. So the tactics are relatively sophisticated, and their efforts are like, we're just seeing a real persistent and an accelerated amount of activity, particularly from Russia, but also from Iran, I would say. So that's on one side. I would say on the other side, I think we should acknowledge that the intelligence community is really forward-leaning in providing public statements. They've issued 3 unclassified statements over the past couple of months, at the 100-day mark from the election, 60-day, and now 45-day mark just a couple days ago, where unclassified intelligence community coming from the Director of National Intelligence statements about, here's what threats we face, here's what we can talk about, here are the tactics they're using. I think that's a reflection of real lessons learned from past elections, particularly 2016, to inform citizens about this activity and help build resilience within, our society. For our part at the Justice Department and the FBI, we've been very aggressive in calling this activity out, and the way we do that is through our charging documents. And we brought a couple of cases involving Russia in the very recent past. Just to go into those a little bit of detail, because I think they are really significant cases. One involved RT, formerly Russia Today. This is the arm of the Kremlin, and it had set up basically a $10 million scheme is what we're charging, to use a company based in Tennessee, an American company, and use that company to send propaganda, its propaganda, to influencers on the internet. And these influencers not necessarily witting of what was happening, but effectively acting as the mouthpiece of Putin and interfering in our elections by issuing propaganda of Russia and disinformation. In another case, sort of a related but separate case, we call it the doppelganger effort by Russia, which was, they basically had used internet domains largely as fake news sites like Washington Post, Fox News. Looks just like Washington Post and Fox News, except it's totally fake, and was used to send out Russian propaganda to American audiences. And then we've recently also, just a few days ago, called out Iran for its efforts to interfere in elections through targeted spearfishing campaign against the former president's campaign. So if I may, Suzanne, one question I think that I get asked pretty regularly, and maybe it's on your mind or the minds of folks watching, why do we care, or why should people care about this, right? Is this, and maybe it's obvious to this, this group, but I do think it's worth, addressing that question. And that is, from my vantage point, why people should care and why we really are trying to sound the alarm here is that, elections are the foundation of our democracy. What makes us different from Russia and China and Iran and authoritarian countries is that we have free and fair elections, and we have to defend those elections. And the right to vote, the choices we make in our elections, those are the choices for American citizens and American citizens alone. And when foreign countries try to influence those choices, and they do so covertly or secretly, that violates our laws. And we need to enforce those laws in order to defend our elections, because, again, when those countries seek to undermine our democracy by sowing discord in the United States or by serving their own interests at the expense of ours, that's fundamentally undermining to our democracy. So I think this could not be a more important set of issues, and I think that's why we in the Justice Department, along with others in the government, are taking it so seriously.
I think I really appreciate your perspective on this for a few reasons. One being, this is very difficult for the average person to be able to identify what is propaganda and what the source is for information that they're being pushed, that's being pushed to them. But you actually have the perspective of understanding how the chain works from A to Z, where most people don't. So in an environment where it's extremely difficult, we're all getting data so quickly on our phones, on our computers, whatever it might be, it's tough to keep up. We want to make a quick decision, and then we want to go ahead and share something if it sounds interesting, we want to look smart, whatever reason. But you're actually seeing how, the sort of behind the curtain. What is your thinking about sort of how people need to be reconsidering the sources of material? Because as you mentioned in one of the cases that was brought by your department, some people may have been used unwittingly. So how do you, I know you're not a policy person, you're a prosecutor, but how do you deal with that? And how are you thinking about the problem on a broader scale?
Look, I totally agree that is the challenge. And I do think that, look, on the threat side, these countries, they see our elections as moments of vulnerability for us. And that's why they're ramping up their overall, threat activity, propaganda, and disinformation around our elections. So they see this as in their interest to do this. Like, so what does that mean, like, for us? Like, how do we, how do we defend ourselves? And I just think, like, one of the main ways is through transparency. And that's what I think it's such a significant development that the Intelligence Committee is issuing these bulletins, these warnings. It's why we're bringing these cases. Like, to me, like, there's nothing quite like a Justice Department. Now, this may be me speaking from, my particular vantage point as a DOJ lawyer, but when the Justice Department brings an indictment and we say, these are the allegations that we are prepared to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in an open courtroom, like, we are standing behind these allegations. Like, that's a very strong statement of what we believe the truth to be and what we're prepared to do to demonstrate that. And so, again, fundamentally, what we're trying to do is shine a bright light on this activity to bring it to the public's attention in a way that will help the public be skeptical when they see something. Like, they see what looks like the Washington Post and it says a headline. I'm making this up, but we put out the actual headlines. But it's, one of their main goals is to undermine U.S. support for Ukraine. That's one of the primary goals, right? So they all want a headline like, Ukraine losing to Russia, or like that. I think if a discerning reader, it requires a degree of discernment and skepticism on the part of the electorate. But you look at that and like, people should be questioning it, just like we question or should be questioning everything we see, right? To some degree. But this is I'm not saying it's easy, and I think it can be hard, and I do think that they have decided, these authoritarian countries have decided that it is in their interests to interfere in our elections because they understand there's consequences, and they understand that that this is a time when we are vulnerable. So they are trying to pursue their own national security interests at the expense of ours through these efforts.